According to the Food and Agricultural Organization's FAO, there was a release from the Federal Department of Forestry, Nigeria, about 974,674 hectares of forest area is productive. And that seems like a good thing, except when you think about 2,342,147 hectares of forest area is partially productive. Again, 12.2% or 11,089,000 hectares of forest area in Nigeria is forested, comparing with 2.9% or 326,000 hectares of primary forest that we have in Nigeria. That is just a little of what we have. And what is the cause of this? Of course, the rate of deforestation in Nigeria is unbeatable. It's at the peak of itself. And you can imagine that deforestation rate in Nigeria is about 2.38% annually, which calls for immediate action. And so today we are calling for an immediate action. If you consider this forest, we are talking about the topic today, old growth forest, and we'll be having this discussion and this conversation with an erudite professor emeritus in the house as well. Forests that have developed over a long period of time, essentially free from anthropogenic activities, are old growth forests. Just to a layman, forests having trees of long-lived species beyond traditional rotation or harvesting age. That is what we are discussing today. And with me this day, I will have, like I said, an erudite professor emeritus join us from Puerto Rico to discuss this particular topic, and the person is Nicholas Van Liew Brokaw, all the way from Puerto Rico. He's joining in from Puerto Rico, and I'm in Nigeria. I'll be running today's program today. Also remember that this is PADI, Plant a Decade initiative, which is focusing on a bifurcated goal. The first is to bridge the information and knowledge gap on climate education, as well as to plant 10,000 trees in 10 years. That is the goal for this particular movement. And today we'll be having this discussion with Nicholas Van Liew Brokaw today. Hello, Brokaw. Bienvenida a bordo, if I got that right, in Spanish.
Gracias. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in the Plant a Decade initiative program. I've had a long-term research project in the country of Belize, and I was going to briefly describe it because it's given me a lot of insights into old growth forests, which you described, and what their value is, how they change through time, and how they might change with climate change. I was intending, if I might, just give a brief introduction to the forest with a few slides. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I can give.
That would be nice. I was going to talk about that too, because I understand what you're doing. I think you are the main researcher for that particular project, having 200 tree species in that particular forest, Belize, like you called it, 390 species of birds, 70 mammals, and all of that. We can talk about biodiversity in that particular biome. So let's get into what you have for us concerning Belize forest.
Okay, I'm going to put up my PowerPoint and then share the screen. Well, again, I'm very pleased to be here. I just wanted to show you where we work, and you've already described the place quite nicely. It's a large protected area with a lot of biological diversity, and it has a lot of what we call old growth forest, which, as you pointed out, is forest that has not been disturbed by people in many centuries, or at least for a very long time, and has reached an advanced state of maturity. These forests are valued for a lot of reasons as old growth forests. For one thing, they do harbor a lot of biological diversity, both plants and animals, that are not found in younger forests. They are valued because they store a lot of carbon that otherwise would be in the atmosphere and contribute to global warming. And they are very valued for aesthetic and spiritual reasons. Now, in this talk, I'm going to show some results of how these forests change in time, and then I'm going to speculate a little bit about the effects of future climate change on these forests. The project takes place in Belize, which is a small country here in Central America. It's a tropical country, as you can see here, adjacent to the Caribbean. Old growth forests have a particular kind of recognizable attributes. Usually, they have very complex three-dimensional structure. There's many different kinds of trees, as you can see in this picture here on the left, different kinds of tall trees and short trees and big trees and small trees and lots of vines and understory, and there are tree fall gaps and there's tall canopy. Three-dimensionally, they're very complex, and that's what makes it a good habitat for many kinds of plants and animals. In particular, there are big trees, such as the example you see here of this mahogany in the middle picture here. A third thing is that, and this is something people don't often realize, there often are very big vines, what we call lianas here, very big vines that sometimes are older than the trees they are on. And then the last attribute is that you can find regeneration, that is seedlings and saplings of trees that dominate the canopy. So there's a sort of, tends to be a stability in species composition. You see these seedlings here, they will be future generations replacing the same species in the canopy. We had a study in which we had a hectare each of four forest types. I won't describe the forest types, but I just want to point out there was a hectare each of these different forest types. I'm going to talk particularly about this, what I call the upland dry forest, where there tends to be more wind than in the other types of forest. And in the riparian forest, forests along a river, which flood occasionally. And this has consequences for the biological diversity in those forests. Here's some of the results. On this horizontal axis here, I show the forest type. Here's the upland dry forest on the left and the riparian on the right. I'm just going to talk about those two. The reason I'm talking about those is that I want to talk about the numbers of species in those forests. And so on the vertical axis, you have number of species that I found in that hectare. This includes just trees that are reached 10 centimeters in diameter. We began the study in 1991, and 25 years later, we went back and we restudied those plots to see how they had changed. And it appeared that these two forests, upland dry and riparian, were still the most diverse. In other words, there were more species in those forests, although there were some changes. And so I asked myself, why are there more species in these forests? They're all old growth forests. They have not suffered any anthropogenic disturbance. They're all in the same climate. However, they are in different topographic locations. The upland dry forest is subject to winds. And I think the reason it has more species there is because about 40 years ago, there was a windstorm, a natural windstorm, of course, which knocked down a lot of trees and allowed many other species to colonize. And so it's reached a stage where you have a combination of the old growth species and the sort of second growth species. And another reason is because it's dry, there are a lot more individual tree stems, which usually adds up to more species. But it has something to do with natural disturbance. On the right-hand side, you have the riparian forest. This is the same thing. This forest floods just about every year. A lot of trees fall down because their roots lose their grip on the soil, and a lot of light comes in. So there's very high turnover, mortality, and recruitment. And because there's a lot of light, many different kinds of species can come in and colonize it. So these are natural disturbance factors, I believe, that lead to high number of species in these two forest types. So the next question is, if that is true, what will happen with climate change? And so these are my main points, and this will be my summary slide. old growth forests where we work in Belize, their dynamics vary greatly from place to place and through time. The cause of this variation is natural disturbance, but climate change may bring some changes. For example, in the upland dry forest that I mentioned, this one here, if there are more big, strong hurricanes, it may get really, there may be more and more disturbance there. It's likely that there might be so much disturbance that you're only going to get second growth species. Remember, we're still talking about natural disturbance. That might reduce the number of species. Likewise, over here in the riparian forest, it may get drier and maybe it won't flood so much there, which would change the disturbance regime there, again, affecting the number of species. Or it might just flood more. I don't know. But what I do know is the forests are changing and the future forests will be different. I just don't know exactly how, but I have some hints. And then the last point I want to make is, as you can see, we had a 25-year interval between the inventories we made in these study plots. And that allowed us to see real change, not just year-to-year change, but long-term change in the plots. And if there's any opportunity to study at that for the long term like that, where you all have old growth forests, it's a very worthwhile thing to do. So now that is my talk, and I will take it off so that we can have our discussion.
Wow, thank you very much. That's a
if
wonderful presentation. I was going to ask many questions, particularly about the Belize and the forest there. Of course, it seems like a privately owned forest, but yes, I've seen some of the works you're doing, the researches you're carrying out, quite amazing, incredible. I went through some of them, but yes, but time would not permit. I would have loved to ask more questions, particularly on that forest. But yes, you mentioned something about the disturbances, and I want to ask, of course, I think you said it, that they are attributable to climate change, right?
Diversity of the forest is affected by disturbance. Climate change will change the natural disturbance regime, and therefore may affect the number of species present. So the forest is going to change if climate changes, which it will.
Absolutely, I get that now straight. Now, of course, I think one of the things we are doing is to bring research to the fore. And over time, I've noticed, especially in this divide, that we do not have people. It's only researchers that get to see what researchers are doing. Other people out there don't get to see these things. And these are instrumental to development and our actions together as regards climate action and all of that. So I feel this is very important that we have these kind of discourses, these kind of conversations to the fore, so that people can be abreast, they can get into the know as to what is happening and what they can do, what are the responsibility of everybody with regards to climate change, climate action, and climate mitigation and adaptation as well. So away from that, we'll talk about the fact that you've done so many works, and I think I was going to ask about the old growth forests that have not been disturbed by humans, just like we said before now, that about 200 years. And that popped up a question in me, because the rate of deforestation in Nigeria is 2.38% annually, which means that many of our forest reserves, even primary forest reserve, are almost lost. Not to even talk about being tampered with. They are much more than tampered with now. They are being deforested. We have quite an abysmal situation in the country. What are the policies? What are the management objectives of your forest conservation unit and departments? How do you do this thing to ensure that you still have old growth forests around Belize?
Well, the area that I work in is part of a larger reserve, which is about 100,000 hectares in area. Part of that reserve is allocated for timber harvest. And they have a very carefully controlled timber harvest. But the other part they allocate as a nature reserve. Now, Belize is very fortunate because the population density is quite low, and they make a lot of money there from tourism. So the situation is different from what it is in Nigeria. But I think my main point is that if you have a large reserve, the policy would be to try and keep part of it as undisturbed by human beings, if that's possible. And then you will learn to see how those forests change and see the benefits of having an old growth forest stands.
The topic when you were talking about how climate change, is related to the disturbances and how it can change moving forward the structure of the forest particularly. And I would like to ask also that, I was checking through some of your works and I saw how, and the question is this: three-dimensional structure and tree species composition of tropical forests, which is particularly one of the things you've worked on, and I saw that in one of the works you've done. So how can you help us into the understanding of the dimensional structure and tree species composition for your particular project that you did in a tropical forest? I think that should be in Belize, if I'm correct.
Yes, I mean as I mentioned, the older the forest, the more complex it is in terms of physical three-dimensional structure. And that is a natural process as forests mature, growing up from an old field. And I think almost anywhere in the humid tropics, which includes a good part of Nigeria, forests could grow up and within say 200 years, reach a state pretty much similar about it, and reach a very mature state. And even though climate will change and those forests will change because of that, they will still be in an old growth state, which I think will make them have particular value relative to younger forests. But the purpose of studying the changes is so that you can distinguish between what is natural and how natural disturbance compares with human disturbance. And then that will let you know. I think that will give some hints about how to manage a forest, if you can see how it differs from human disturbance.
Absolutely, yes. That's amazing. Again, Professor, thank you so very much for sharing these for us. I think I saw at a particular point too, there was a particular research you did at Harvard, and I think a forest in Harvard also. Quite amazing. But can you help us into how you have been able to manage different forests? Particularly, I saw some that you were a principal at some point. I saw others that you were maybe just a researcher around the forest. How have you managed, and what are the things you have seen? What are the peculiarities you've seen in these different ecological niches that we have? What are the variations and the things you have observed over the years as a professor?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Harvard Forest. The Harvard Forest is in Massachusetts, which is in the northern United States. And that in the part of the United States that's called New England, the first part that was settled in the north. And in the first couple of centuries people were there, they practically clear-cut the entire landscape. But then when areas to the west of other parts of the United States opened up where the farming was much better, people moved from New England to those other places, and then the forest grew back in Massachusetts. And a lot of it has gotten to be fairly old forest. It's still, however, and this is what I learned when even though the Massachusetts forest is very different, there are a lot of basic similarities in how natural disturbance affects it. And that's been true other places I've worked, although there's a lot of variation as well. And when you see the variation, that's what really teaches you what are the critical factors that make forests different.
Moving away from that, I think also many of the courses you taught general biology and laboratory part, you taught evolution, plant biology, ecology, environmental science, water resource, tropical ecosystems, tropical forest ecology. Yes, my question now is, what can tropical forest do, especially with the current rate of deforestation, especially in some African countries? Like I know, I'm quite sure because I did a project also during my undergraduate days, and the project was centralized in the 14th largest state in Nigeria.
Wow.
We have 36 states in Nigeria, and Oyo State is actually the 14th largest in terms of land mass. So I saw how that there was so much deforestation, even in Oyo State, about the central. My work focused on 5 different forest reserves, and it was quite abysmal, a pitiable situation that we have lost almost half of those forest reserves. Now, what can tropical forests do now to also ensure that we create something we call natural based solutions for climate mitigation and climate adaptation going forward?
Well, I mean, this is a fairly trite response, but one needs to develop sustainable uses. In a country where there's a very high population density, most forests are probably going to be used. And what you have to do is come up with uses that make those forests valuable as forests, as opposed to as cleared land. The other thing is convincing people, not so much with facts and figures and monetary amounts, but convincing people, the public, that they want forests, that forests are good. In Belize, for example, there's a lot of campaigning about preserving their natural history and preserving their forests. As I say, they have a good situation there because it's so few people. But it's a very strong campaign, and the average person, even though they're not a forester, they're not a biologist, they're not an ecologist, values their natural history because they've been taught about the benefits of it. So I think education is a good thing. Education about natural history and its value, and then science to find ways to use the forest without destroying it, which is not an easy thing. I don't say it's easy, but that's the direction that we should go.
Very well. I can't agree less with you on that because I know that's one of the reasons why we also came up with this particular program to become a place for people to get information. Of course, like we say, research and science is all about information sharing. It's all about bringing out what we have seen, what we have researched on to the fore so that people can know as well. Of course, we need to talk about the essence of forests. We cannot overemphasize it. I think one of the reasons why we brought this up was that, and also we're not just stopping at talking about it. My team and my group, we are working on planting 10,000 trees, like I said earlier, just to also put into perspective how people can do this, not just talk about it, but also be engaged physically. And, to a very large extent, this would help in climate mitigation, of course, like we know it now. Of course, as we speak now, in Dubai, the COP conference, the climate conference is ongoing. And I've been I'm waiting for the aftermath of this discourse and particular conference that they're having. So I don't know if you have any envisage. What do you think would come out? Because I know from my country particularly, the federal government took about 422 delegates to Dubai for this. And I hope when they come back, we have reforms and policies. Absolutely. I think we have one of the largest number of delegates in Africa, in the world. I think Nigeria, Kenya, and some other, according to report, about 1,000 plus actually were actually taken as delegates in Nigeria, some sponsored by the federal government, others sponsored by private enterprises and all of that. I think it's a very good one that we do that. But yes, coming back, I hope and we hope and expect that we get to work, we get started in working and making sure we do our own quota. Because if I should relay all the problems we have relating to climate change, you might not really understand because it's quite a lot. Talking about deforestation at its peak in Nigeria, talking about environmental pollution, a lack of poor drainage system, different ways of causing global warming, adding to climate change and all of that. It's quite an abysmal situation. But yes, going forward, what are your projections after the climate conference COP28 ongoing?
Well, I hate to say it, but normally there's not nearly as much action as there is talk. But there have been some conferences that have achieved certain important goals. I can't cite one right now, but they do. And the other thing is they raise awareness, even if they don't actually achieve tangible things at the time. They raise awareness, and people are beginning to say, "Oh yeah, COP, I know what that's about. It must be something important." And then if you've got, I think you said 400 people at that conference,
Yes,
if each one of them
422.
comes home and talks about what they learned and emphasizes the importance of it, I think that can make a big difference. So I think we're going to continue forest loss, and climate change is going to be a problem. But I think even though sometimes COP seems, those things may seem like a lot of talk and no action, they do in the long run have a beneficial effect. Those 400 people will help Nigeria, I'm sure.
Well, I really do agree with what you've said, because oftentimes we've seen that happen where we have many talks, little effort, I meant to say. We do a lot of talking. At the end of the day, it goes back to the drain. All the efforts of the talks don't get to become reality. But yes, we hope that we will do better, which is why myself and some other crew members as well, some of the youth I have as friends as well, we are trying to make sure that we advocate for climate change, and we also put the forestry profession on the fore, because of course I think one of the ways we can do this is to popularize the profession of forestry, which is of course not a very big deal now. From the university I finished from, I received messages after I graduated, many people asking questions, what can I do with forestry? And it seems to be one of the driving force for doing this program, having this program, because they seem not to see a point in studying forestry when all the forest areas we have is deforested, when we can actually not make bold claims of forest in the country. So people run to places, go to Kenya, go to other places around Africa, and even in the US to study, because they feel we do not have the forestry in Nigeria. We don't have that sector functioning. So it seems like a big deal for many students as well, plus me, which of course we've had this conversation, and I'm very sure that many persons from here and from now want to really embrace this profession as a thing, not just for mitigating and adapting to climate change, but also as a profession that can help humanity at large. So I would like to have your parting word. If you have one other thing you would like to say concerning all of this discourse we have, especially old growth forest, like we call virgin forest, which I don't believe we have any primary forest as of yet. I think it has been depleted. My own opinion from research I've seen, we don't have a virgin forest or an old growth forest in the country. But yes, your parting shot before we call it a time today.
Okay, I think even if it's not considered virgin or primary, try to protect the oldest forest you have, even if it's not really old. And one more thing I wanted to comment on your planting your 10,000, 100,000 trees. That's an excellent thing, because if local people do it, then they consider it to be their forest. So I think working at that level, I'm really pleased to hear the work that's being done at that level, as well as this other level where 400 people go to the COP meeting and come back. So you have several approaches, I think, that can encourage people to protect forests for the future.
Well, it's been a nice time having Professor Emeritus Nicholas Van Liew Brokaw, a Professor Emeritus at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio or Piedras, if I got that, I'm sorry. I'm also good into Spanish. But thank you so very much for having this time, taking this time out of your very busy schedule to come and, educate us more on old growth forests. We hope to have you subsequently as much as you would have time. Thank you so very much for joining us. Once and again, my name is Idowu Anuoluwapo Ezekiel, and I'm the convener as well as the lead initiator of PADI, Plant a Decade initiative, with a bifurcated primary objective of planting 10,000 trees and also bridging the information and knowledge gap on climate education. and climate action in Nigeria, and as well some other African countries as we have it. And this is Immaculate Television. I have partnered with this television station to anchor this program, and I want to say a very big thank you to the management of this particular station as well. Thank you so very much once again, Professor Emeritus. It's nice having you on set.
I thank you.
All right, so thank you very much. All right, see you on the next edition of Plant a
Okay,
Decade
bye.
Initiative. Bye.